Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to our special guest, Sarah, as well. How are you today, Sarah?
I'm doing fine. Thanks very much, Graeme. It's really great to be here.
Some very quick introductions from ourselves. My name is Graeme Butler. I work as a talent acquisition specialist for Enterprise based up in Scotland, so working very closely with universities and graduates alike.
My name's Sarah. I'm a careers consultant, and I've done that for many years with lots of different students in different universities, both in the UK and internationally. And my role at the moment is to focus particularly on that transition point of students who are leaving university and just trying to find their way in the world of work or into further study or whatever interests them at that next stage. So I do a lot of coaching around that, and I do a lot of workshops, and sometimes I even get to collaborate with people like yourself, Graeme.
Excellent. And who better to have on our webinar today? We really appreciate and thank you for that. Just to make everyone aware who has tuned in, we are streaming across multiple platforms, including LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, to name but a few. And there's loads and loads of useful content like this one on our YouTube channel from all the other previous sessions we've done. And I'll provide some links to those at the end as well, so you can continue your development there onwards. And today we are talking about time management, an interesting topic. So let's just get started, Sarah. Really, how are you at time management? I guess because I'm okay. I would say I'm not the best. I'm not bad. I'm somewhere in between.
Yeah, I would say it isn't something that comes naturally to me. And I hope people sort of find that reassuring, because you're always going to come across people who are excellent time managers, and it just fits in with their personality and the way that they do things. But there's a huge amount you can do if you're not of that type, and if it is a bit harder. And what you need is some strategies to make it happen. And I've found sort of adopting strategies in time management really not just helpful, but actually essential for managing my day-to-day life, because it doesn't just happen.
I think we can all relate to that. And when I was doing a little bit of research on this topic, I wanted to kind of cast the net quite wide. So a lot of the hints and tips that Sarah are giving you today, is not just from us. This isn't just our opinion. It's combined research from multiple sources, including billionaires, Olympic athletes, straight A students, and multiple entrepreneurs as well. But I actually wanted to begin, Sarah, if you don't mind, with talking about something which has been a bit of an elephant in the room, especially in recent months. So 1440, for any of you who are good at maths, are able to work out, that's the number of minutes that we all have that are in a day. But there's been a big shift, hasn't there, recently, with influencer culture, about people saying that everyone has the same amount of time in the day, and everyone should just get up and do work. Why are people not working anymore? And I just really like to get your thoughts on that, Sarah, really, as well, because it has been quite controversial. It's been all over social media, hasn't it, as well?
It certainly has. When you start to think about it, I hadn't got a strong awareness, a sort of vague awareness that this was a thing. And I guess it's another sort of concept that's been reinvented in a way that's really relatable, so it becomes really helpful to us. The idea that we have a certain finite amount of time, and and we're quite accountable to what we do with that and how we choose to use that time.
I think it is interesting, isn't it? Because if we just take that number as a concept, it's different, and I guess this is the thing that I want to kind of throw out there from the beginning. And again, this has been quite prevalent recently, is that in theory, yes, this is the amount of time people have a day, but everyone has different commitments. And some people who are juggling multiple jobs or having to care for others, or are working and studying at the same time, aren't going to have that amount of time. So I'm always very mindful of anything to do with influencer culture, where people are saying, we all have the same amount of time in the day, we should all be able to make it work, because that's just not realistic. And I think Sarah's point from the offset is you have to find something that works for you. But one thing I did find from looking and researching on this topic was this concept of stealing your time, people stealing your time, and not necessarily seeing time as a valuable asset. So just to give an example of that, there's always going to be people in the workplace who will come and they'll say, oh, have you got a minute? Or they'll want to talk about kind of other trivial things, or I don't want people to feel bad for scrolling on their phone and looking at dog videos. I spend so much of my time looking at dog videos online, and that's good respite for me. I actually find that a way to unwind. But one thing that really became very accountable from the research that I did was seeing time as value. However much of it you have, and we all know that everyone's got a different amount, is seeing time as value. And would you agree, Sarah, that's something that you kind of relate to?
I really would. I think one of the really powerful things that I heard about was to imagine this as cash. So if you imagine £1,440 coin sitting on your table in front of you, you have that's a finite amount of money, and you can only spend it once. So what are you going to do with it? And if it starts disappearing because you're not thinking about where it goes, you would start to feel quite alarmed about that. And I think even worse, if people start coming up to you and taking great handfuls of it away, the panic would set in. And I found that quite helpful in terms of thinking, this is a resource that ticks down, and we don't tend to think about time like that. We tend to think about it stretching out in front of us. And I think a deadline is the sort of classic example of when we start to realize the real value of time.
Completely. I couldn't agree more. And that really relates on to our next point, which is a lot about focus. And with whatever time we have, how do we use it? And this is a concept which I absolutely love, which is talking about MIT. Not the university. I mean, great university, but this is about understanding about what is your most important task of the day, or your MIT, and do you do it first? Is it one of your priorities? So to give it a little bit of context, your MIT can be a number of things. It could be, if you're working in sales, what is going to be the main task that contributes to you growing your sales revenue by 25% year on year, or helping you strive towards that promotion. Or it could be your dissertation, which is something that students are all too familiar with as well. The reason we've put the domino on this slide as well is about breaking it down and asking yourself, when you've identified it, what is the next domino that I can tip over today? That age-old analogy of what's going to lead you on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And then it's all about getting into that discipline of actually scheduling time to work on your MIT as well. And that should be when you're at your cognitive best. So there's a behavioral psychologist called Dan Ariely who really talks about this, that we have this very kind of short 2-hour cognitive window, which changes for each of us, but it's often between 8 and 10 or 9 and 11 during a day. And that's when we should be focusing on those most important tasks, or the ones which are stumbling blocks or causing us to procrastinate. Is that something you can relate to yourself, Sarah?
Yeah, I think so. I think I find this quite an interesting sort of idea, because when you talk to people about their style and their way of doing things, people tend to have themselves sort of tagged as either an early bird or a night owl, and say, well, I'm at my best at this point or this point. But actually, I think this concept is more about not just about when you're at your best, but actually about setting up your working day in a really positive way. If you can tackle your most important task, you are almost sort of free then to get on with everything else that needs doing. And I think that is a really important thing in terms of feeling your own productivity.
I completely agree. But of course, what do we do? Most of us, what are we doing between the hours of 8 and 10 or 9 and 11? We're often sitting in standardized meetings. We are maybe, walking to university, or going to the office, or on our way to get coffee. And this is an interesting thing that I've learned as well, is that being in business for many years now, is that often what you'll find is that very, very senior people in an organization, if you send them a message either last thing at night or first thing in the morning, you won't get response for the first couple of hours. And it's not because they don't care or they're not interested. It's because, guess what? They're focusing on those key tasks, which are their main focuses. And everyone is a bit different, but it's definitely something that I picked up on because other people are focusing on their MIT.
Yeah.
And this is a great concept which I try to use. I don't always aren't always able to do it, but it's something which I find is really, really helpful. Really helpful.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea to share this as well, because so many organizations are very tied into the idea that your meeting should happen first thing in the morning. And you will all have had that experience where you're called into something at 9 o'clock or 8:30, and actually there's something you really need to get done, and the meeting could be at another time, but it's not always the best way of starting up days. So this is a great one for organizations as well, I think.
Completely, I agree. And guess what? It's like we put these slides together in a really good order because it really links in very nicely to the next part, which is the power of calendar management. Are you able to share, Sarah, anything in terms of your kind of best practices on how having an organized calendar can kind of really support your time management?
I do think there's something there about sort of personal style and what works for you. And I certainly have colleagues who will they'll have their calendar on their phone and they'll carry it around with them. I tend to be more of a kind of, you won't see this properly, but I have a sort of very colourful notebook, and I will plan out my day in writing with timings. I mean, it's not always completely set in stone, but it keeps me right through the day.
Yeah,
what sort of style do you use, Graeme? What's your approach?
I'm a big colour. I'm also colour, but colour coordinate my meetings, so I have a good idea of those. There's a great analogy that I like to use, and I shared this with my line manager yesterday, that it's the 10% rule of meetings. So if you're working 40 hours per week, for example, there should only be 10% of your calendar taken up with internal meetings. And just because otherwise sometimes you'll find that so much of your working week is tied up in scheduled meetings, and do you always have to be in these? And we always find again that meetings, if they're scheduled for 30 minutes, they will run for 30 minutes. If they're scheduled for an hour, they will run for an hour. So I think the calendar is really important. And actually I would say, and from the research that I did, probably one of the top productivity tips that came up was that productive people and people who are strong with time management live by their calendar and the organized kind of notebook that you keep, not a to-do list. Because here's an interesting fact for you today, Sarah. The theory goes that around 41% or over 40% of items that are put on a to-do list never get done at all. Never get done at all. They're put on their list and they're just left there. So it's almost like to-do lists are kind of the graveyard for things which are important but not urgent, and then they get left or lost. And so the whole point of this is, if you really want to get something done, and you have to be regimented by this, is you pick a day and a time in your diary and you commit to it and you live by your calendar. It doesn't work if you let things slide in your calendar often, but you have to be disciplined, and you're going to end up moving things. So absolutely, organizing your calendar is critical, I think, and it really helps. And along with that is a great analogy which I found doing the research, and I know you and I spoke about this a little bit, Sarah, and this is an analogy which I hadn't heard of until I looked at this one, and this is about procrastination. So the next point I want to make is to eat an elephant beetle first, which may sound like a strange concept, and it's not about being lazy. So this is the thing that a lot of people struggle with, which is procrastination. And procrastinating isn't the same as being lazy, because procrastinating is choosing to do something else as opposed to the task at hand, which is often something a bit more favorable. So it may not be your MIT, it might be messaging one of your colleagues, it might be scrolling your phone. And this analogy of eating an elephant beetle first comes from Hindu culture, which is the analogy that if you do something super important, it may be challenging, or something least desirable or pressing hardest task first, that's going to stop you procrastinating on it for the rest of the day and going to free up more time for you to do other tasks throughout the day. Is this something, Sarah, are you a frequenter of eating dung beetles?
I think we are so hardwired to avoid the difficult stuff, aren't we? It's, you know, it's just what we naturally try and do. It's a survival instinct. And so I think just even thinking about what are the tricky tasks, what do I need to get out of the way here, you know, is something that we can all sort of pay some attention to. So when you're writing those, that, you know, when you're organizing your calendar, you know, think about what those tasks are that fall into that category, and just get them out of the way. Otherwise they tend to prey on your mind as well, and they become more difficult to do rather than easier to do as the day goes on.
And it really affects your focus throughout the rest of the day. I think, again, if you've got something difficult, it's so easy to put things off. It's so easy to put things off, but it makes such a big difference. But as you say, we are all hardwired into that, and it really affects our focus. Now, I know the next slide, Sarah, is something you're a huge advocate of. Maybe just because you might just be a fan of Italian cuisine, but I know we've spoken before, the Pomodoro technique is much more than a great source. So for our listeners tuning in today who maybe have not heard of it, are you able to kind of share the kind of concept with how?
It's a very simple concept. So the idea is that you focus on something for 25 minutes. So you give yourself a manageable amount of time to tackle a task, and you commit to it. And after that 25 minutes is up, you take a break, and then you have another 25 minutes, so a 5-minute break, and then another 25 minutes. And by doing this, it almost sort of tricks your brain into focus, by knowing that this is a limited amount of time, rather than having the day stretching out in front of you. Is this something you use as well, Graeme? Is it something you've tried?
I do. How can I explain this? My brain's quite creative, so I often get into a bit of a flow state, whereas when I'm in full flow state mode, what I sometimes do is do more 50 minutes continuous and then take a 10-minute break, or something along those lines. But I think it is good. It's almost that little bit of dopamine, isn't it? It just kind of rewards you, that little bit where you give yourself a little pat on the back, focus on the work for 25 minutes, pop up, stretch your legs, especially if you're working from home or working remotely. It's really, really important to get the legs moving. It's always similar, isn't it, with, you know, if you go, I know this is kind of ironic, but on long haul flights and you're spending all that time sitting down, you need to get up and keep the circulation going as well. And it's a really good way to keep you focused. There is actually an app which I have had on my phone before, which literally just sets this as a timer, and it really gives you that little buzz when you need to get up, because sometimes the time can just fly away. But it is a really good way of maintaining your focus, because we will otherwise end up with a lot of screen glare and eye strain and things as well. And I definitely think that's something that I've noticed more. I mean, I wear glasses, you can see, but I really noticed that some days my brain and eyes are just really drained from the amount of virtual engagement. So the Pomodoro technique is absolutely great for that. And the theory with the Pomodoro is that every kind of 4 cycles, you then have a slightly longer break. So you reward yourself with a 15 or 20-minute break alongside that as well. And I guess this just kind of really links into our final point today, Sarah, which is looking after yourself. And this is an interesting one, again, which kind of came up with, you talked already, Ali, and it's, you know, obviously we have spoken about this webinar before, but you talked about the working schedules and the patterns. And I think that's really prevalent because, again, often the number one productivity tip that came up when I was looking at this was what you do in the first hour of your day. And this isn't about what you do when you start working or university. We're talking about what you do to look after your mind and your body and your mental health and well-being for that first hour of the day. So looking at it from things such as, are you sleeping till as late as possible and then jumping into that first meeting, or rushing into work or university, or are you taking some time for yourself to do something like yoga, meditation, going for a walk, a jog, some sort of exercise, and that makes a difference. What are your thoughts on this, Sarah, to wrap up our
I do think having, we benefit from some sort of routine and predictability, especially when our lives can be quite unpredictable. And I actually have a very, very good friend who completed her PhD while she was working full time. So it was a mammoth task, but she would work very early in the mornings, and she put her success down to the fact that she would get up earlier than most of us would want to, but she would spend an hour doing exercise outside, having a breakfast, having a sort of healthy breakfast, and then she was focused and ready to get going. And she kept that consistent. And I think it's a really good example of sort of how people who have these successes do have these little tricks in their armory that they bring out, which keep them steady and keep them productive. So for me, it's taking the dog out to the end of the garden, and the dog barks at imaginary squirrels, and I drag her back in and feed her, and we have this very predictable routine every single morning. And I think that's extremely important for our own mental health and productivity during the day.
And I can imagine that your dog keeps you true on that. So if your dog hasn't, you'll know all about it, right? So you're almost being held accountable by your dog, which they don't really know they're doing it. They're just loving the outdoors and the walks, I'm guessing too, right?
Absolutely. She's also a great time stealer as well, going back to the 1440. So yes, there's lots of time management lessons from having an animal in the house.
I love that. And I think the point we want to make with all of this is you have to find what works for you, because again, there's loads of things I've seen online about you should be getting up at 4 a.m. every day, doing hot yoga, running a marathon, reading the Financial Times, all by 6 a.m. And for many of us, myself included, that just would not work for me. That would not work for me. And again, I'm one of these people that I've tried time and time again to work out before work, but it's just not something I'm able to do. And I'm better at working out later. And, as you said, Sarah, some people have these different routines, and I am a bit of a night owl, and I kind of almost get my second wind of working productivity between 8 at 10 at night. So I'll often do a little bit of project work at that time, because I'm very kind of cognitively able at that point. But it's about finding what works for you and trying some things out, and without running the risk of sounding incredibly boring. Sleep plays a huge part of this. If you're not getting consistent sleep and unbroken sleep, it's going to affect your focus, which is then going to ultimately affect your time management as well. I just wanted to do a quick plug out to our social channels whilst we're on the today as well. Loads of great ways you can stay in contact with us, including our UK Instagram channel. Of course, we're active on LinkedIn as well, and we've got a copy of all of these webinars that we're running on YouTube as well, so you can jump back through and see loads of all the kind of previous content alongside that as well. Just before we go to any kind of questions from the audience that we may have today, Sarah, are you able to share what's your number one kind of golden nugget or thing that you find that's helped you the most with time management in your career?
I would say, just to follow on from what you've said there, what I probably wouldn't recommend is that you try and adopt all of these approaches all at once. Think about what Graeme's just said around, we all have different styles and different ways of working, and hopefully there will be something in one of those strategies that really spoke to you. So I would probably recommend that you just commit to taking on one of those strategies, try it for a week, really commit to it, and review at the end of that time. We've given you lots of approaches there that you can try. So pick one and go with it.
I completely agree, because trying to do all of these at once is going to probably result in a little bit of chaos, as it were. And I think we can all relate to them. And for me, probably one of the biggest things that I've implemented in my working career, especially in the last few years, is that living by your calendar and not the to-do list, because I'm sure there are hundreds of to-do lists on some of my old mobile phones, etc., and all journal, which never got used whatsoever at all. What I'm just going to do is just stop sharing screen there and just see if we have any questions. We've had a question come through in the chat, so let's take this one. And the question is, how is time management different as a student and when I'll start my new graduate job? So there's a great question, Sarah. So over to the expert. What are your thoughts on how it differs between being a student and being?
Yeah, well, I'd be interested in what you see as well in the graduates that you work with as well, Graeme. But when I conducted a research study looking at students' experiences of transition into the world of the work, and one of the things that they told me was that they had to really draw on a lot of the sort of skills that they'd learnt in university and expand on them, because it was quite different. And I think time management, one of the things they found is the sort of competing priorities issue, that actually the priorities might not necessarily be yours anymore. They could be somebody else's. They could be someone in another country or another department, and managing those sorts of things, but also the unpredictable stuff as well. When you're moving into your first graduate job or a professional role, what you'll find is that things crop up and you have to rejuggle and reassess things. Whereas at university, I think there's a lot more predictability, not for everybody, but often around the work that you have to do. Has that been your sort of experience with?
Yeah, my point is that I was going to say the word pivot ultimately, because it is exactly that. And I think with a lot of university, there's a lot of structure, there's a lot of planned out element. You start a course, you're given deadlines, things could happen to affect you from completing that deadline, but you know the deadlines are there. Whereas time and time again, we can all relate to this, is that in the world of work, you'll have plan A for the day and things will change overnight. A great example would be in our business at Enterprise on our general management program, where you're learning how to run a business from the ground up and doing everything from operations management, customer service, sales, marketing, HR, and finance. The weather can change everything. Great example would be if you get a really bad influx of weather, maybe some flights get cancelled, and instead of people using planes to travel, they'll need to borrow a vehicle, which they'll come to Enterprise. So you could go from being very, very quiet to really, really busy over there. So you've got to be flexible and you've got to be able to adapt with your time management and really pivot very quickly. And so that really feeds into your point on that in terms of how you're able. And that's why one of the key skill sets we prioritize at Enterprise, as many graduate employers do, is that flexibility approach. What happens when things change? If your ducks aren't all in a row, is that a problem? Because I would argue that a lot of business, the ducks are never in a row, and it's just kind of getting through and organizing and working through that. But again, you could easily say that's where time management really comes into its own, because people who are strong at time management are able to prioritize, I think, a lot better and look at the kind of task length and see how long things are going to take and adjust their schedule accordingly as well. So there is that which is something.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what we were saying right at the beginning, is that it doesn't come naturally to everybody, but there are so many good strategies and tactics you can adopt. You absolutely can train yourself in this, and so it's something that we can all learn and we can all work with.
Absolutely. Well, excellent. Thank you. Well, look at that. We're literally right on time now. So just before we finish up, I just wanted to give one last quick plug. We're back next week. We've got an excellent session on presentation skills, which is kind of really going to help you if you've got a presentation to do coming up at university. Maybe you're having to present for a job interview coming up. We've got another great 30-minute session on presentations to help you really get ahead in that domain as well, which one of my wonderful colleagues will be running. And I just wanted to really say massive thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. We really appreciate your support and your wisdom, and look forward to staying in contact. And good luck everyone with your time management going forward. Hopefully what we said today will give you something to take away and you can use to improve. Perfect. All right. Thank you ever so much. Bye for now. See you all again soon.